Thank you, everybody. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. You know, as I have a unique perspective for this today. Being a recovering economic development director with over 30 years experience in that field, and then stepping into my current role as Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Community Engagement for EdgeCore Digital Infrastructure, it really comes to, hey, this is about balancing what is the data center impact, because you guys are always on your devices. And I want to blame Jay O'Donnell for all of this, because in 2020, when she was with COVID lockdown, she just bought everything on Amazon you could find. So that's what started all the demand for data centers. No, I'm going to pick on you for a while today, so I have fun with that. But, you know, I arrived here, and the Arizona, in particular, greater Phoenix economy has changed. About the mid-2000s when I arrived, it was very much a construction-based economy. Think about that. It's all about construction. You went up, and in 2008 we went down. But we came back, and today you are a technology economy. And that's what's unique and a little bit different. You have to be able to embrace some of that. So I'm going to kick off a couple of things. Two of your largest chip manufacturers in the world are based right here. And I think it's important to know the world's richest company, $4 trillion in NVIDIA, also makes chips. Well, what goes into data centers? Chips. They go into computers. And with the advent of AI, you're going to see a lot more power usage. Here in the valley, you don't see that much in the way of water usage. Other parts of the country you still do. But the industry itself is very focused on what I call being environmentally sensitive to what's going on. So, Jay, how many devices do you have connected at home? Any idea? We're going to call you an average household, just because I can pick on Jay. Couldn't pick on Brian.
Oh, he has 10.
Oh, Brian. The average household has 21 devices connected to the internet. Think about every online purchase that I talked about, telehealth appointment or digital classroom that takes and uses data. That's important. That has to be stored somewhere. So cloud-based computing is very much an important part of this economy now. It's also an important part of what I call advanced manufacturing, aerospace, defense folks have been using it for years. So the economy has certainly changed. But as a good economic developer, all of you should be interested in jobs, and more jobs. Susie certainly is, and I think that that's important. But one of the things I want you to think about is data centers are more than physical infrastructure. They do create jobs. And I'm going to give you some specifics. Today, think about what the data centers were just a few years ago. They were small, nondescript buildings tucked in the middle of nowhere, and Carla could only sell them at 8 megawatts at a time. Today, the average data center campus is between 300 and 500 megawatts. I'm talking about
Teresa SDB.
But what I've found in doing some research, and just think about it, there's a lot of engineers and data that goes into all of this, but there is approximately one job for every megawatt that's in a building. All the vendors, the end users, not just the owner, the contracts. So a lot of those are interesting. The other quick thing in my last 30 seconds, there is approximately, the data center community generates about 6 jobs. So spin-off, not for every job in the data center, you actually are creating 6 more. Those jobs, and an average salary across America is about $66,000 in that center. Most of the data center workers today are well beyond that, into the 6 digits. So I will save the rest of it for my roundtable discussion, and since it says 0 and flashing at me, I'll stop there.
So I'm Marla Rand, Senior Manager for Economic Development SRP. I've been living the data center world for about 10 years now. This is not new to me, it's new to some of my colleagues, but this is definitely something that Mark has seen for many years. SRP has quite a bit of data centers in our service territory. The first larger ones were on Price Corridor in Chandler, and now we have quite a bit in Mesa. I got a call from every single person on the corner that they were a data center site now. Ever since it's got kind of really hot, I think every landowner wants this other site for data center, which is kind of compounded to our issues that we're having now that you're hearing about, because we have 15 gigawatts of capacity, or requested capacity in the United States. So just a tremendous amount of requests to grow. Some of it's real, some of it's not. And so as a power utility, we're trying to weed through that and really figure out who are the real users and make sure that we're going to build projects that are going to be built in the long run. And whoever's coming online is going to use the power that's going to be produced. It's not an easy feat. We've been changing our policies around to really match that. We're not the only ones. We're not alone in this. We have tons of competitors, we call them friends, in Atlanta, in Virginia, that are going through this, and we share all the time about best practices and how we work together to make a more unified approach to data centers. We know they're coming regardless. So that was one of my challenges in the cities. They're coming. If you want to know whether if you want to help them and guide them in places you want them to go, you need to be part of the conversation. You can't have it just an open, locate everywhere. And so that's where you see some of the policies that have been put in place to make some units, because we are getting them in places that maybe aren't the best locations for data centers. And so you have to think about when a data center comes, Bill said 500 megawatts, those are big power lines, with 230 power lines with a 100-foot easement. If you have really worked in this industry, you say the 100-foot easement, brand new, that's almost a deal killer for most projects. It's not an easy feat, and when we have to work through these projects, we need to work with our community members to actually get these things done. We're not doing this by ourselves, and so community needs to want to have that data center in that market to help support us getting that new infrastructure on site. And so really working with each other is going to be the biggest thing to get this forward. Bill mentioned a lot of the great reasons why we want data centers. I think people forget this is the AI's supply chain. If you want to move technology forward, this is something that you need in your community. Your community is many, I don't know, that's a different story. But we do need to have some of that in our community. And so being really mindful of how we work with each other and bring them in and where we want them is something that I think it's an open dialogue, and I think that's where we're here to get have that, right? There's a lot of great benefits, and you just have to understand how to work together and do that. You'll hear a lot about APS and SRB in the news about having to go out and get new resources. This is a massive challenge for us, and we are having to make sure that we are isolating the costs away from our residential customers. And so that the data centers are paying their fair share. 500 megawatts, that's a power plant. That is a $2 billion power plant. So making sure that cost is not socialized along other ratepayers is really important, because we want to keep rates low. Like Arizona, manufacturing came in Arizona because of lower rates. We want to keep that. So being very mindful how we share costs, socialized costs, and how to make sure the data centers are paying their fair share is very, very challenging in some ways, but also part of this dialogue that we need to make sure that happens, because otherwise we can't sustain the growth that we're seeing here. And so there's quite a bit of dialogue too on the type of resources, and it is an all resources. You can't just rely on one type of resource. You can't just rely on solar battery, gas. You need all of it, and it's because of the times and hours and days of operation. We're 24/7. AC needs to be on. We hit peak last Tuesday, Thursday. This is nothing turned off. That's a big deal. You want your AC to stay on. And we don't have a reason for them to turn off as data centers. So we have to be very, very respectful of how we go about this and how we bring on resources. But we're also, these resources are in communities that are outside the region. And so we have to be very mindful of how we work with those communities too. So this is not just a Greater Phoenix play, it is an Arizona play. And there's jobs, like you mentioned, out of power plants in outside Arizona that pay $100,000, $200,000 per employee, which is a big deal for the community. So it does have a triple effect. You may not see it in that instant in that one data center, but in the greater scheme of it, it is going to impact it.
So actually, I was thinking about this, and I'm on a mighty team of 3 people at APS, which is a company of 6,000. And in the 4 years since I've been there, this pace of development is kind of the only APS I've ever known. But I think prior to my joining the company, it used to be a big deal if there was a new project needing 3 megawatts. That was like a whale. So if there's anything I can do today, is I want to leave you with some perspective. Carla really kind of talked about everything that's critical to what we're all dealing with. But what I wanted to basically share is, on that note of hitting our peak temp last week, which was 118 degrees, that's the 3rd year in a row of hitting a higher peak than the year before. And I think last year for APS, that date, we served 8,200 megawatts on the hottest day. This year it's already up 8,500 megawatts. That 300 megawatt difference is a power. It's a natural gas power thing. So that's just to serve the existing customer base that we have. And I don't know if I've shared this with any of you, but I'm a native Arizonan, 5th gen. We settled in Camp Verde in the 1870s. And growing up here as a kid, APS was probably serving 1 million fewer customers when I was growing up than we are today. So right now we're at about 1.4 million customers in our service territory, which is spread out over 11 of the 15 counties in Arizona. And again, our peak service is 8,500 megawatts, as we've just seen, but in our pipeline we have 16,000 megawatts. And everybody wants their power when? 12 to 18 months. But we have to consider that it took us 140 years to get to a place where we could serve 8,500 megawatts. So how are we going to effectively double the size of our grid, of our capacity, and serve new customers within the time frame that they're looking for? Yes, the majority are data centers. And 2 takeaways. 1, we do not hate data centers. 2, we are not out of power. We have enough power to serve everybody that currently has a meter spinning with us. And so, like what Carla talked about, keeping our rates affordable, keeping our power reliable, that's what drives our daily business. And I will say that this new demand that we're seeing has literally changed the way that we do business at APS. We've stood up new teams, we've stood up new processes, we have a queue now. You never had to get in line for service before. But when it comes to the customer, it's not just the end user, it's also the communities that we serve. So of the 92 cities and towns that are incorporated here in Arizona, I think we serve just over half of those. If you're from a community and if your community wants a data center, we will help you power that data center. We're not here to say no, we're to pick winners and losers, but what we have to do is be really mindful about the how. And so yes, that's where APS, SRP, TEP making some headlines and trying to add new nuclear, for example, lots of ideas and thoughts around that, finding solutions in new natural gas when the pipeline is pretty thin. We've got to figure out how to do this so effectively. We're also becoming technology companies. And I think that a lot of the solutions that we'll see in the future will be tech-based. So that's something that we're excited about. This is an exciting time to be at a utility as an economic developer, looking at the growth that we're all currently experiencing. But if I were to share with you about, I think, what did you say, Bill, it's about 500 maybe megawatts average for a data center. If you want to know, what's a megawatt? 1 megawatt powers 160 Arizona homes. 1 megawatt powers a super Walmart, a big box that's on 24/7. We co-own and then solely maintain the Palo Verde nuclear generation station. It's the largest nuclear power plant on the West United States, generating about 4,000 megawatts of power annually. We share that. The state of Arizona shares about 2,000 megawatts. So for me, when I hear of an end user coming to one of our communities, and you've read it in the papers, saying we need 1,800 megawatts of power. What I hear is, okay, what you're telling me is, you need as much power as the entire state of Arizona receives from the largest nuclear power plant in the country on your one spot. Like it just, so what we really need to do is help all of our customers and users right-size the requests, because we can't call anybody liars, but it's also math. And we have to contend with physics. And so I love to say that power is science, not magic. And we will put the numbers together and pencil it out to try to help everybody get the power that they need to help see our great state grow. Thanks.
So I'm wearing two hats today. I head up our national and local Arizona land use zoning, municipal county government relations group for Poles and Brady. We represent all different types of developers, development, land users. And then I'm in my second term on the Central Arizona Project, or the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board, which oversees the policies and distribution and conservation of our Colorado River water allocation here in the state of Arizona. So at my roundtable today, feel free to talk about land use and zoning issues. Let's talk about some of the new text amendments that have been going through multiple cities regulating data centers, but let's also talk about water. Starting with the land use and zoning aspects, full disclosure in terms of my job duties, I've recently been representing clients both in front of the city of Mesa and City of Phoenix City Council hearings as they concluded both of their processes on the text amendment. So our firm has been looking at how these new regulations impact the data center community. An important aspect too is the data center adjacent community, meaning users that may not be a 100% big box data center, but they might be a financial institution that absolutely requires an accessory data center adjacent to their use for their own personal company needs. And so that's another aspect that I wouldn't say is getting lost in the discussion, because it certainly came up in recent discussions with these various cities. But it is something that's incredibly important. Data use, data storage is essential to a lot of our big employers, big users that may actually not be leasing out or using that data center space for third parties. So just some other food for thought. Really what I think in a sum are cities, Chandler, Tempe, Phoenix, Mesa, are really attempting to do is they're trying to bring in some predictability of where data centers can be located, so trying to identify specific zoning districts, specific land use types that are permitted, while also reining in some of the various ways that they can regulate or basically curtail those uses. So, and that really comes from cities wanting to get more involved in the energy discussion, wanting to get more involved with one of my hats, the water discussion. But as you really go down to some of these new ordinances, they're also looking at how these uses are compatible with neighborhoods, from various buffers or setback requirements to new noise regulations. So it's been interesting to work with landowners, work with data center developers, work with the issues of property rights, and try to find some compromises with the various cities on how to move forward with regulation. Now, on the water side of things, cities are wanting to also take a look, not just at data centers, multifamily, single-family homes, all uses, but for today's discussion, they're trying to take a closer look at what the water use impact is of data centers. Now, the good news is, and Bill will be one of the big proponents of this as well at his roundtable, the good news is that the newer data centers are on a closed loop system. So the days of there being an open system or ongoing need for pumping of water into data centers is hopefully being phased out. So a closed loop system is kind of like a radiator in your car. You hope you fill it up once and it's able to sustain itself within the system. I have one client that estimates that their closed loop system, as opposed to some of the older technology, will save an average of 650 million gallons of water per year as opposed to some of the older technologies. So that's good news. Now that doesn't say that the fill-up need at the beginning isn't still a water need, but we are seeing data centers as becoming a more and more water efficient use, basically in general. Also, as we move forward from the CAP hat, we're in the middle of some pretty intense discussions between the upper basin states and the lower basins, Arizona, California, and Nevada. The states are kind of throwing mud back and forth. Who's wasting water? Who's using water efficiently? They're pointing to things like data centers, like underground storage. Is the state being efficient with water use? Arizona is being incredibly efficient. We are one of the age-old best water managers in the country. So let's talk about that as well at our roundtable today. Really appreciate being able to be a part of the discussion today.
I wanted to start with just a couple of things that I've heard. Bill actually started out with a comment, balance. And if you leave with nothing else today but just that word in your mind, balance, that's what I think we're here to really talk about today and what the city of Mesa is focusing on. I've also heard a couple of other things. The pace of development that has happened over the last few years is significant, unprecedented, impact existing demand and then future demand. So kind of putting all of that together in this puzzle is definitely a challenge. Just to give you some context, over the past 6 years, Mesa has become a major hub for data center development. We now have 15 data centers, 1,500 acres, and 15 million square feet constructed, approved, or proposed within our city limits. So we're home to global leaders like Apple, Google, Meta, and Core, and we are in support of a thriving digital economy. We want data centers, we're not prohibiting them. Last week, our city council did pass a text amendment to our zoning ordinance, as Ben alluded to, and it really defines data centers. We did not have them defined before, so we were really categorizing them as indoor warehouses, which we know they are not. They're very, very different. So now it really guides them into industrial zones, specific zones, heavy industrial, general industrial, and then it requires the city council to authorize new data centers through a planned area development overlay. And then we've introduced new standards and guidelines for operations. Ben also talked about this. And it really does kind of help minimize the impacts for residents and neighboring businesses. So they're required to do sound studies. They're also required to do water and energy reporting, design requirements, and then also public notices, which many of the advanced manufacturing and industrial uses need to do that as well. So it really kind of levels them up to the heavy industrial users like that. So we've developed these standards and the text amendments in consultation with the industry. The industry didn't get everything that they wanted, but we did certainly come to a compromise in several instances. And again, so we're not prohibiting data centers. We're just steering them into heavy industrial and general industrial. And I think that this approach, we've really tried to respect and honor those existing owners and investors, to leave them alone and grandfather them in while responsibly managing then our future and deciding kind of where they should go. So why are we doing this? It goes back to balance. And because communities are always changing and growing and developing, the context that existed 10 years ago looks very different from the way it looks today. And many years ago, we were fighting residential encroachment into our economic corridors. And so if you think about kind of what residential real estate was 10, 15 years ago, it's very similar in the way we look at the land use and the amounts of land that data centers do require. So it was also really funny when we were talking about this last week. Our city manager said, I have 3 kids. Just because I don't want a 4th kid doesn't mean I don't love kids. So this is kind of that same metaphor where we have 15 data centers. That is a lot of data centers for one community. We are still going to see more, and Carla said regardless, they're coming, so we know that, and this is a way to steer them. But as they have really come in droves, our city council recognized the need to be really strategic about what to do and where to steer them. So balancing land use, compatibility, land availability. Mesa is not built out, but we're getting there. Utility demands, we have issues with power, sustainability, and then residential impacts. Really thinking about the noise and the height of some of these data centers. I think Edgecore is the tallest, at 95 feet. So it's kind of big, kind of. And our goals are really pursuing those high density job creators. So industries of aerospace and defense, advanced manufacturing, but really focusing on high density, high wage, high quality jobs. So we're looking at the opportunity costs compared to if we had a data center there or if we had another industry, and really balancing that puzzle. So we are proud to support data centers in our community. We do understand the economic impact that they bring to our communities. We are most grateful to our partnership with SRP because they've been phenomenal partners and really trying to figure out how to help these companies that are coming in. The data centers certainly, but also the other manufacturers that are in the queue waiting and trying to understand when the power is going to be available. So again, balancing all of these pieces is not an easy task, but it is worth the time and energy and effort to do so, making sure that we do have a diversified economy, not just for our communities, but for our state as well. And in my roundtable, I do have a data center map of where all of them are located in Mesa and kind of the prospects that we're waiting for online and how they compare in terms of acreage and job count. So you can see that when we talk on the roundtable. Thank you.
I want to start just by really thanking AAD for bringing this group together. I think that it's interesting that as a statewide organization, we all have differing opinions, but we're all part of this statewide organization because we just want to see Arizona as a whole thrive. And I think it's great that we have so many cities and so many differing opinions up here about how to do that, because I am a true believer that in Arizona, there is something for everyone somewhere. And it may not be everything for that community, but there is something for someone somewhere. And so I think it's great that maybe what I'm looking for in Buckeye is different than what another city is looking for. So being able to have this different perspective is really kind of important. So those of you that aren't familiar with the city of Buckeye, we are the westernmost city in Maricopa County. We are also 640 square miles by land, so we're the largest city in Arizona by land mass. And we're only 16% built out. So when we start talking about differing industries and looking at, I love what Jay said about diversifying the economies. We're looking to do that. And so, but one of the things that we're looking to do is bring in data centers. We currently have 0 data centers in the city of Buckeye, just to be clear. But we do have 2 data center sites. So one is called the Buckeye Tech Corridor, and the other is Buckeye 300. So they're very large data center sites. There are 2 locations that the city is supporting, but I want to be real clear about both locations have both short-term and long-term goals. So the Buckeye Tech Corridor is a 1,700-acre data center site, and so it's interesting to say that Mesa's got 1,500 acres of existing data center sites in their community now. We have an entitled site that's similar of size that has no data centers in it. But that data center is a 40-year build-out plan. So I think it's also really important to understand the perspective on how long some of these data center sites will take to build out. And so they're not asking for the power, they're not asking for the things on day one. But I think that as Arizona continues to grow and we continue to be a tech-focused state, having these data centers to support it, having the 40-year foresight to be able to figure out how to do that in the state, I think is really important. And so Buckeye is doing that, and we're working on that. Our other site, Buckeye 300, is a 300-acre site. If you haven't figured that out, it's a very creative name. But that one is obviously more short-term, right? Building out 300 acres of data centers is more short-term development versus the 1,700 acre site. But with that, Buckeyes, we absolutely value our partnership with APS. We meet with them regularly on basically economic development activity across the city, whether that's data center activity or other manufacturing activity, to make sure that as we grow, as the fastest growing city in the country over the last 5 years, we do want to make sure that our partners are included in this process. And so we're not looking to entitle and bring in data centers without our partners knowing that this is an industry that we're going after, but making sure that we're being smart about the growth and building the infrastructure together as the city grows. And so I think that's really important. One of the things that Buckeye is looking at is we have thousands of acres of power generation being proposed in the city now. So whether that's through battery storage or solar development. And so we're looking at it from both sides. We think that this is an important industry, but how can Buckeye play a part to actually generate the power to put it on the grid to meet the needs of the industry as well? And so I think there's a balance there, and happy to talk about that more. But I think one of the other pieces that Buckeye focuses on is these two data center sites are actually the catalyst to new economic engines within the community. So Buckeye 300 is actually adjacent to a 2,500 acre mega site that is a future employment site within the city. And when you look at the data center that would come in, they would spark and actually fund the water and sewer infrastructure for 9,000 acres in this particular part of the city that we wouldn't otherwise be able to see and get developed. And so there's other additional benefits that these data center sites bring to the community. The larger site, the Buckeye Tech Corridor, is actually adjacent to our airport. And so when you look at complementary uses to aviation, having a low intense use like a data center and not having residential uses at the end of your runway, I think is really important. So the city looked at strategic land uses. These data center sites are put in the correct locations in the cities, and they're actually advancing other economic engines within the city because we do view our airport as a major economic engine. But other things that these data centers are doing for Buckeye specifically is, like I said, they're funding water and sewer infrastructure. So both sites will fund regional water and sewer campuses in these areas that don't otherwise exist. They also fund additional public safety services that otherwise do not exist. They fund additional transportation corridors and major interchanges off of I-10 that otherwise do not exist within the city. And so they're advancing other things. The other thing to think about is, and I appreciate that Ben mentioned this earlier, is each of these sites formerly were proposed as residential. And so each of the data center sites actually use less water than they would have if they would have stayed residential. So the major site, the Buckeye Tech Corridor, the larger of the two, actually uses less than half of the proposed water that it would have if it would have stayed a master plan residential community. And so there's a lot of additional benefits that I think these data centers bring to communities, because ultimately they do create jobs, and Bill did a great job talking about that. The jobs they do create are high-paying jobs. But what they're also doing is creating economic engines so we can bring in those high-tech manufacturers and those other jobs that us as economic developers are looking for. So we look at it as a catalyst, and I would love to talk to people more about what we're doing specifically with those two sites in Buckeye. I've got some maps that show perspective of where those sites are in conjunction to existing development or other economic engines, and how it's really going to kind of kickstart and jumpstart a lot of development in the city. And so we're really looking forward to speaking more at the roundtable. So thank you.
So I'm going to be talking about the natural resource part, but also kind of where have we been and where are we going? It's nice that everybody before me talked about all these different aspects, because as an environmental and energy attorney, I help my clients to figure out where they're going, so we can call the site selection, and then permitting, and then ultimately the power component. So I do a lot of my clients' different projects. I'm also the executive director of the Arizona Energy Consortium, which was formed in 2011, having conversations like this. And we've been having our conference, which we just had again in May, the Southwest Energy Conference. Then also a lot of our wonderful utilities and different aspects of the industry. And so we've been talking about this since we started those conferences. How do we solve these issues of growth, and not just with data centers? I do represent a lot of very large data centers and that tiny little semiconductor company up in North Phoenix. So I get the balance of trying to make sure that the different industries have power. Also represent clients who are building the power, so it's kind of fun to be on all different sides. Bill and I were just chatting about when we worked on Apple over 10 years ago, which is frightening. So I'm not new to the data center issues. Been seeing it coming, and to the state's credit, they did a great job of getting them to come here, right? I mean, we passed incentives, and where did they come? And there was a lot of infill, and I don't blame the cities for wanting to make sure that that growth is smart growth, right? And a lot of my clients have located in cities. But it's difficult to do. And, you know, when we did the Google facility in Mesa, it is a 230 kV line that we work with SRP site. I mean, that's who wants that right next to their development. And so we work with the community on that, but it's difficult to do. So given all of that, where are we now? Where are we going? So a lot of my clients are starting to look at self-generation. And it's difficult. And I understand the utilities issues about, hey, we can't have all these, you know, big power plants spawning for state either, which I agree with too. And so we've worked with the utilities, to their credit. Our utilities are amazing. We look across the country at all the different things going on, the struggles in those states. Our utilities, to their credit, work really well with industry and listening. And we're trying to also take part in that and help them understand what it is that, you know, the data center industry, and it's not one size fits all, but what it needs as well. And so as part of that, there's been a lot of discussion around the queues, and we've been involved with those discussions and how that all works. But as you've heard multiple times, these folks are coming. They have very large budgets, which is astounding in some ways, and they can do, you know, they can build these facilities. And so on the one hand, they should be building their own power. It should not be socialized to the grid, which every single one of my clients anyway make sure that they do not, you know, they're not socializing these costs to the regular ratepayers. I worked with Chairman Thompson at the ACC to create the data center and large user docket that is open right now. And I know SRP submitted a letter. I encourage you please to submit letters and input into that, because this is, you know, one of the ways that we're trying to solve these different issues, none of which is easy. So what I'm seeing is, and I know some other people in the room are working on these, you know, these data centers have very large loads, and they're very localized loads. It's for that data center. And so what we're working on, and I'm working on multiple, and I know others are too, is having them build their own, basically, plant, essentially. And these are gas, in different iterations of gas, which is also challenging because we have limited amounts of gas. And so what we're trying to do is work with the utilities, make sure that the interconnections are working, it's not going to grid in any kind of disarray. And I think you're going to start seeing that come up a lot more as the nuclear technologies get developed, and you're going to have these quote-unquote behind the meter, or working with a different utility outside of the metro area that's usually because of air quality issues and air permits to site these facilities. And it's a very interesting time. Data centers do not want to be power companies, but they're having to do it because of the, you know, lack of power. So happy to talk about that more in our roundtable, and anything else anyone wants to talk about. Thank you.
City of Tempe's got a different perspective because of our size. Just as a reminder, 42 square miles, and we're landlocked. We're not getting any bigger. And last month, I think we have 6 sites, only 6 undeveloped sites in our whole city of 10 acres or more. Only 6 of them. Most of those sites are so small that Bill wouldn't even look at them. They make no sense for a typical data center. However, I hear that there's always 2 or 3 data centers that are looking at sites in our city. So there's proactively, over the last 6 months, our city did go into some code text amendments to really tighten up our process, not to redline our city so that data centers can't come in. We just took our process, which allowed by right in certain industrial districts to be able to do a data center with, really just a full permit. So now, by use permit in our GID and our heavy industrial districts, you can still do a data center, but you have to go through the use permit process. All we really did, we took a very soft touch. This all passed in June. So it's now part of our code text amendment. What we've done now is, because the only resource we really provide as a city for data centers is water. We get about 80% of our water from SRP, from their resources. So that's what we need to manage and be concerned about, that we don't overpromise and underdeliver to any industrial user. So now we require, based on your anticipated use, we ask you to come in as part of the planning process, the use permit process, and tell us what your plan is on how you're going to manage that water. We don't expect that's going to be a big problem in the future, but now we've got some hard and fast guidelines. We pull other departments right in at the beginning. So if you go to community development to do a data center, economic development, public works, everybody kind of comes to the table right away to make a plan to see if it makes sense for one of our 6 sites that we may have. But really for us, it's about, it's twofold. One is kind of a practical approach. Being landlocked, having so few sites, we really, as economic development in Tempe, are looking to kind of preserve those limited resources for other industries that provide more jobs and more employment within our borders. Everybody knows Tempe we strive to be a little bit more urban and metropolitan than the typical city. Compare and contrast us with say, Chandler or Scottsdale, our immediate neighbors. We're looking to build vertically. We're looking to build housing like no other city, for our size. So because of that philosophy, semiconductor, aerospace, biotech, those are where we really kind of see our future growth for infill. Philosophically, we like to locate jobs near people. We want to be a walkable city. We see AI and the need for data centers being one of those products that can be delivered from afar. It's not like building a grocery store in the community. We know we got to build grocery stores, all over so that they serve where the user is going to be. Can't expect them to drive to Buckeye to get their groceries, but they can get their data from there. So we're okay with data centers. As a matter of fact, if you go to our website and you say you're interested in opening a data center, we've got a link that sends you right to Jay. And you're welcome. You got it. Anyway, happy to answer any questions if you want to talk about what data centers in a small city might look like. Thank you.
In El Mirage, we have 2 major data centers. We have Microsoft and Compass. Compass right now is doing at-risk grading. They're planning on building 4 255,000 square foot data centers once complete. Microsoft has 450 acres. But before I get into that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about El Mirage, how we came into play in our story, and I have so much data and information. Please come to my table and I'll bore you to death. El Mirage is in the Northwest Valley. We're settled between Surprise and Peoria. We have 36,000 people. 10 square miles. 8 miles is residential and some commercial. 2 miles is industrial. I have roughly 1,200 acres of industrial land. When Microsoft came to town, my biggest building in the industrial area was 50,000 square feet. Imagine that. It was all farming. Our infrastructure was really shoddy. A little bit here and there. We needed a lot of help. So when Microsoft came to our city, that was just, I can't even come up with words to describe that. The pros really, really outweighed the cons, and we formed a fantastic partnership with Microsoft, and one of the things that they helped us out with was putting in new water, sewer, dark fiber, and of course additional fiber. Or power. They're putting in new new 230 kV lines. Right now, the poles are up, the lines are coming in. Thank you. We're really thrilled with that. But Microsoft, more importantly for the city of El Mirage, was a catalyst for us. That 50,000 square foot building moved to Microsoft's 255,000 square foot building. Next thing we know, in the next couple of years, we have 7 new industries, over 1.6 million square feet, diverse industries in a commerce park. It's going to provide so many job opportunities that we didn't have before. So that in itself is absolutely amazing. Microsoft came to our city hall a couple years ago with a little fun fact sheet. When they built their data centers, they were looking at the city of Goodyear and the city of El Mirage together. Okay, and they gave me some economic data on the impact so far. In 2023, 201 jobs were created. Their average wage is $148,000. We didn't have a high-tech job in my city, not one. And also, it added another 429 additional jobs in support industries. For people in this city, when you're dealing with construction sales taxes, normally they're one-offs. You get a company comes in your area, they build a building, you bring in that revenue from the construction sales tax, and that's great. But when you're dealing with data centers or multi-phase projects, Microsoft's going to be building for 18 years. Think of the construction sales taxes that we're going to be bringing in. And our city has very little retail. So having additional revenue coming into our city has really, really helped. And property taxes, they came in and got farmland, a class 6 assessment, and made it into a class 1 and built on it. $17 million in property taxes, 17 million in 2025 on a county assessor that did the math yesterday. So we embrace it. Oh, one other 26 seconds. We're right next to an Air Force base. Okay, so we have a lot of land use restrictions, and they don't want to see a lot of density, a lot of people in that particular area. And it works out great for us. No trucks, very little damage to our roads. So we like it. Thank you so much. Come to my table. I can throw my